Next up, we have Dan Salzman from HP, who's going to talk about how brands can focus the brand message to unify customers. Dan's global head of media, analytics, and insights at HP, leading a team that strengthens programmatic media capability, drives innovation, and data-driven decisions for the business. Previously, Dan was at J&J and has his PhD in social personality psychology. So he'll be talking about how HP created emotional connections with consumers that led to strong brand affinity, and building thoughtful, innovative campaigns to elevate marketing and cultural conversations. So thanks so much.
Okay, that sounded like a lot of stuff we were doing there. It'll be a little more focused than that, yeah. So I'm going to talk about something, oh, wrong one? Got it, thank you. I'm going to talk about something really different from what we've been discussing so far. And it's a piece of work that I'm personally really proud of that we did as a company, and I think you're going to find it very interesting. I'm going to show you a video at the end that I'm going to warn you you'll have an emotional reaction to. It's a little bit jarring. So I'll be interested in hearing what the feedback is as we come back and get questions. I'd love to hear what you think. But before I do that, I'll tell you a little bit about HP. HP is a 2-year-old company that's $52 billion. And we say 2-year-old company because about 2 years ago, the company split in half. There's an enterprise business that's split off that's very, very focused on large businesses and enterprises in the software and solutions space. And HP Inc., which I'm a part of, is in printers and PCs. So we're a $52 billion global company. We sell printers and PCs in the consumer and in the commercial spaces. We also have a big bet in 3D printing where we think we're going to win in a big way. And we're doing lots of other things like VR and AR and lots of other interesting technology-related things. It's a good time to be at HP. The company is growing double digits in categories that are declining. So the split was very good for us. It's been a very innovative, entrepreneurial, startup-like environment in a massive company with huge resources. And I have a couple insights jobs open, so just talk to me afterwards. San Diego is a nice place to live. So with that, in addition to that, just tell you a little bit about myself. At the split, we had the opportunity to restructure marketing, and as part of that, we recognized with my boss, Antonio Lucio, that this whole space of data sciences, insights, media increasingly being driven by big data, as well as social media and the feeds that we get from that are really much more intertwined than they ever have been before. So I took a job that actually spans all of those different groups for HP. And my task is to actually look for opportunities for us to drive value across each one of those groups. And we've realized some really significant, very innovative things that we're starting to experiment with. As you know, change is hard, and we'll continue to work on that. But this is an example of what you'll see here is an example of some of the work that we did across social media, as well as traditional insights work. But first, I'm going to just talk a little bit about how we think about marketing at HP. I am not going to go through a series of slides that talks through how the world is changing, but it is. I think you've seen enough of those slides today. I think it's actually, when we think about marketing and outbound marketing, I don't think the industry or any one of us has really fully internalized how big a deal this is. How many of you watched that Instagram fast clip stories and were like, how does anyone ever process that? How do you communicate anything through that? Well, I think it's because as people are consuming media really differently, and as technology is delivering as technology is actually delivering marketing, it is actually the vehicle by which we deliver marketing today, it's actually changing the underlying thought process, the underlying maybe even neurology of how people consume and interact with information. For us, it's a little bit foreign, unless I'm sure there are some young people in the room who grew up with it natively. But the generation that is coming up today, just fundamentally thinks and processes information differently. Think about voice and where that's taking us. As very quickly you're going to be able to say, Alexa, buy my dog food. And suddenly a brand is disintermediated in that purchase decision. Think about sound and the ability to access information and sound at any point. It's a great app that you can get on your phone that you can actually use as a tour guide in a city, and it'll geolocate you and tell you everything about what you're seeing around you. AR is like a minute away. It's just like 1 minute away, where we're really going to be able to look and see faces, get information about people. In the next year or two, we're going to see products hit the market that are going to change that. And even facial expression recognition through a camera is quickly coming live, to where you're going to get a different web experience potentially, or Instagram experience, based on whether you're in a good or a bad mood. That's really coming. So what does that mean for marketing? So in a world where marketing is carried through technology, and technology is changing actually in ways that make that interaction and that experience with technology much more like a human-to-human interaction, our premise at HP is that increasingly we're going to need to behave as a brand in a human-to-human way. It's no longer one-to-many marketing or one-to-one marketing. We're going to have to figure out a way to integrate ourselves into their experiences. And that's kind of a big thought when you think about the implications of how we do things, how we create content. What does a creative brief look like when the output of that creative brief is a conversation that you're going to have with a bot on a support site? Just fundamental changes to how we think about what we do as marketers. So so how do we reinvent marketing? We see 5 big opportunities. I'm going to talk through one of them. I'm going to talk through human insight on this, and I'll give you an example of what we did here. But we think in the experience age, this looks like the slide got a little fuddled. That's okay. In the experience age, which is what we're calling this human-to-human age, we see 5 capabilities that we're focused on building. The first is human insight, and I'm going to talk in depth about that. The other is analytics that really are purposeful and focused. There's media excellence, the ability to really understand environments like Instagram and others and operate effectively within those. There are partnerships that we need to build, and then also iterative experimentation. So this is how we're thinking about building capability within HP as an enabler of delivering human-to-human type experiences. So I'm going to talk about human insight. And this slide really did get messed up, so I apologize for that. So human insight, and what we mean by that, and this is a friendly audience of market researchers, and I grew up in insights at J&J and Kraft Foods, so I understand the industry very, very well. The market research industry, as Stephen said, was invented in the 50s and really hasn't changed much. And it's very focused on optimization of product, optimization of copy, all those sorts of things. Very sort of company out, and evaluative in its orientation. We believe that going forward, with customers who are increasingly experiencing things in very different ways and experiencing marketing in very, very different ways, we're going to need to understand them as people. This is particularly true. This is probably something that many of you haven't thought about. But the privacy issues that are hitting us here in the US, the Europeans are way ahead of us on it. There's something called GDPR, which in Europe, that means that starting on May 25th of this month, people opt in versus opt out of advertising in digital, which means that in the future, Europeans will give permission for brands to speak to them. That's a massive, massive change. So imagine a world where you just simply can't buy media. You actually have to convince a customer that your content is good enough for you to watch. How are we going to do that? Well, we have to do that by understanding them as people, understand what they value. And that actually requires us to adapt how we ask questions. It's not going to be necessary. It's not going to be survey-based every time. Focus groups will be a tool, but it's not the only tool. Increasingly, we're going to need to move to much more real interactions where we understand people fundamentally in their environments. And we need to ask those questions in really different ways in order to do that. And we also have to have a forward-looking view of this because it's changing so rapidly. Instagram Stories is a great example. I'm glad he went before me. That story thing is new. And a month from now, there's going to be something totally new. And that changes the cultural experience and the expectations of customers, and we need to be one step ahead of them as we develop that. So human insight. Big area, very different way of approaching how we do work, and we're starting to really play that out. I'm going to show you an example of a really big piece of brand work that we did. HP is a very democratic brand. It is a brand, we have products at the very premium end of the line, and we have very value-oriented products. And so we really believe that we have a mission to help people reinvent technology or reinvent their lives through technology in a very, very democratic way where everyone is part of the group. So we had this coming out of December of 2016. So you remember what happened the month before. Suddenly we found ourselves in a situation where we were actually in a creative review. And we were looking at a piece of creative that was developed by a California company on the West Coast with a look, tone, and feel that was very comfortable to us. And we started to ask ourselves the question, given what just happened, we have Trump unexpectedly elected into office, and suddenly this groundswell of desire to understand who the Trump voter was and what are we missing? What were we missing? And by the way, are we communicating in a way, in the subtle values and the look, tone, and feel of how we're communicating with our customers in a way that actually appeals across the board? So we asked the fundamental question. Reinvent is our tagline. Keep reinventing, right? So we asked the question, what does reinvention mean to both camps? And actually, what can we as a brand do to stand for something that can unify across those two camps? So it's kind of a question a brand doesn't normally ask. But we asked it, and it actually ended up becoming incredibly powerful for us. So we started with deep social media listening. And this was a very structured, in-depth, probably the most involved piece of work we had ever done. We actually looked back over the prior year in social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter and all the others that are out there. And we did some serious cultural forensics on that data. And we used it to actually divide people into two groups, based roughly on sort of orientation, political orientation. It wasn't based actually on who they voted for, because we of course don't know that, but based on political orientation. And then we analyzed the cultural affinities, understood the core tensions that really drove those people, and then we overlaid back all the cultural signals, television watching, car ownership, all the things that you normally would do to really understand the differences between them. And then we brought it to a final synthesis. And what we discovered was that there's really two groups, and we all know this, but it's, and when you think two groups, and when we frame the question around what does reinvent mean, they're fundamentally different. And picture two people standing in a road. One's looking forward and one is looking backward. Reinvention to the people who say the way we were, which of course tends to gravitate towards the right side of the political spectrum. These people would reinvent by going back to an idealized time in American history, when there were communities, when people shared half a cup of sugar across the street where you talked to the drugstore owner. On the other side, a better tomorrow are people that tend to be a little bit more educated, tend to be forward-looking, believe that momentum and technological progress is good. And fundamentally two different orientations to what reinvent means. And of course, I won't go through this in detail, but I'll let you read it. Fundamental differences, again, in terms of that orientation. There's a nostalgia. There's a desire to restore old values and ideas on one side of the spectrum. Community, relationships within friends, loyalties, tight connection to place, often, incredibly clear sort of orientation to something it used to be and a desire to go back to that. Better tomorrow, answer to the problems of the past really lie in the future. They're looking for new ideas, new solutions to old problems. They're willing to look at other countries, other places, to see whether there are solutions there that can be applied. I'm sure that many of you are sorting yourself and self-sorting yourself into one of these two groups. But fundamentally, these are the differences. It's one's looking forward, one's looking back. Both have a desire to reinvent, but from a very different orientation. So here's where it gets interesting, because up until now, there's lots of stuff in the press that you could have read that would have given you the same sorts of insights. We actually derived this ourselves, and is valuable around this idea of reinvention. But there's nothing terribly new. Here's where it got interesting. We decided we needed to go deep with people. And so we picked 4 cities. And we picked 4 cities that really were, in the US, had both. Were really a mix of people in terms of political orientation. And we ran some very in-depth online community-based focus groups over the course of a few weeks. And from that, we actually pulled out groups of people that we brought into an in-person environment. And we challenged ourselves here, not to do a traditional focus group or even an ethnography, but to try to create a situation where the real tension and where the real human insight could come out. And so we ran these groups in each of these cities in someone's home who volunteered. And we brought them in for about a 6-hour work session. And we sat them down, and for the first several hours, we actually threw out issues, and we let them fight about it. We let them actually argue on what those issues are. And it got emotional. Thankfully, we didn't have to call the police, and there was nothing physical. But the natural emotion came out around the political issues that people were dealing with. And then we took a break, and we brought them back, and then we said, okay, now your job is to identify the things that you agree on. And to their credit, everyone rose to the occasion. These groups rose to that occasion in a big way, and they really sat down. And actually, I think the context of the emotional engagement that they had with each other before drove a level of engagement in trying to figure out what they could do together to a much higher level. So what did they agree on? I have 7 things here. The first is that our country is chaotic and fractured. There's a sense that political orientation has polarized people. The role of social media as a weapon, in many cases, is very clear to people. They understand that, and they're worried about it. It's a time, lots of the people that we talked about, suddenly people are choosing friends or breaking family relationships as a result of whether you agree or not with them. That's a really different time for us. It's not only in the US, by the way, we're seeing that in many other countries as well. So they agree on that. On the positive side, they agreed on 6 things. There's six things that we found. First, education. There's a clear understanding that education is a ticket to the American dream, and we need to enable that for everyone. Different points of view on that. There's a recognition that those who are economically deprived or middle class or below, accessing good education, particularly at a college level, can be really complicated for them. But that's an issue. They understand they want for their children and for themselves access to education. Okay? Environment. Interesting branding problem here on the environment. Across both sides, people really agreed that the environment is important. They don't want pollution. They don't want the environment to not be right for their kids going in the future. They want to actually personally experience a clean world. They understand that. But the global warming, what's sort of imposed on these two groups, at least in the folks that we talk to, this idea of global warming has become this strange polarizing factor as to whether you believe it or not, and is somehow caught up in whether you believe the environment is good or not. Again, a misunderstanding. Family, key universal value. People understand that those connections that they have with their immediate family and extended family are really critical. And this expands beyond just traditional definitions of family as well. Community, neighbors, community groups, school groups. People understand that is a core element of what they want to have in their lives. And they feel like some of the things that are happening in our communities today are actually hindering that. So that's something that's agreed on across both groups as well. Healthcare, one of the most contentious issues that we have out there. A lot of the focus in the political environment is really focused on how you deliver that. But across the board, people agree that health and access to healthcare is a critical issue, and almost everyone has a personal experience on the good or the bad side of access to healthcare. And safety. This is one of the most important things, is creating an environment where your children are safe, where they can ride to school, where they can, where you understand that they're going to be okay in the world. A lot of this, again, focused on their personal families and stories. Okay? And then lastly, economic security. So a recognition that there's a polarization of income, that it's hard to get, without an education, it's hard to get a job that provides economic security. And even when you have a good job, sometimes it can be difficult to do that in this country. And I think in both sides, there's a recognition that it used to be a little bit easier in some ways for economic security to emerge from people. So these are 6 areas. There's one, they agree that it's chaotic, and then there's 6 areas of commonality that people came out as something that they agreed on. So our task as HP was to say, okay, around the idea of reinvent, which ones of these can we pick off and actually be a positive force in driving a message and ideas that can actually unify people across the political spectrum. So I'm going to show you a video. We have picked those, and we actually have some charitable efforts in place on those, and we're also building some of the story of our advertising in a lot of ways around some of these core themes as a way of delivering that. And we believe that we can be a force to unify. But before I show you a video, which was our first cut at this, which I'll warn you again that you're going to have an emotional reaction to it. Probably the biggest learning, and wow, this is a little, look at that. Something happened. Hopefully the video will play. So one of the most amazing insights that came out of this piece of work was that when we finished these groups, every one of the groups came back and said, thank you for the opportunity to have a real conversation, to actually sit down and talk to one another and understand what the differences really are. Because if you look at the list of issues they agree on, they kind of correlate to exactly the political issues that everybody's dealing with. So how can everybody agree on what's important, and yet we disagree so much on whatever it is we're told, I guess. So and the power of that personal conversation, the appreciation they had for the person on the other side of the table, that they developed a personal relationship with and a personal appreciation for that point of view, it was incredible. And people came away really changed in how they viewed their own personal roles in how they operate within their political belief system. So it's very, very interesting and powerful piece of work for us. So we finished this about in the summer of last year, and as we were coming into the holidays, we identified a series of implicit things that we did within the work, within our external communication, as well as within some of our charitable work. But we decided to do an explicit piece, and we did an explicit piece around the holidays, and I'm going to let this speak for itself. If it plays, let's hope for the best. Oh. Can I get some help playing the video?
They're here! Do you think Aunt Leslie made Let's go. Good. Merry Christmas. Welcome. Come on in. Sister.
You probably do, don't you?
How are you?
Good. I would like to take it. Yeah, okay, give it to me.
Let's take a picture.
Oh, hello.
The craziest thing. It happens every time.
Listen to me. You know what? I'm only
Listen,
supposed
I mean,
to come back.
you're gonna have to let me get a word
You know
in at
what?
some point here.
I'm telling you.
Sorry. Gorgeous day today, right? And it keeps saying that global warming is like a real thing, right? It's 35 degrees. Like
Here we go again.
I said lies, lies, lies.
Let's just enough of this nonsense.
What are you talking about?
Okay, stop it.
Have you read about it, or
Yes,
are you
I
just
have.
listening to your head?
Enough.
Your ideas are crazy.
I am crazy. I'm the crazy one. You don't do anything but complain about everyone. You can leave now.
What? You don't tell me when I get up. Don't you dare talk to
This
me
is
like
my
that.
house. Get the hell out. Mom, please.
Excuse me.
You okay, sweet?
We are more together. It's not about me. It's not about who I wanna be. It's not about you. You know that we are better off as two. 'Cause we are more together. Together.
kind of messy, isn't it? Maybe that's a little bit of what life is actually like. So a little help advancing this slide. Okay, so I'll open it to questions in a minute, but I think we came out of this piece of work with some learnings. And one on the insight side is deep human insights really come from creating real human interactions between people. And the industry's been moving that way. We've been doing ethnographies for a period of time and real world kind of stuff. But I think we got to challenge ourselves to do even more of that, particularly as it relates to big issues like this, but also as it relates to how people experience product or how people are experiencing marketing, because it is so different from what we're used to. So we need to raise our game there in terms of how we do this sort of work. Also within marketing, we need to reflect the diversity of our customers in our communications. That's a massive area for us at HP globally. We're spending a lot of time on women. We're also actually starting to build in specific insights work where we treat political affiliation as a demographic. We're actually surveying people to understand that, because representing across the board is equally as important as understanding income and ethnicity and age, because it's become such an important identifier for people. And then lastly, on our brand, our storytelling around reinvention, we can have an impact. And I think the brands represented in this room, we can collectively have a huge impact in a world where things are tough sometimes, taking on issues that we really believe are positive, and identifying things that can unify people and bring them back to their center. So that's it.
Hello. Hi, thanks for that great talk. I'm sure from your social media results, you guys picked up a lot of different themes. What made you choose that one?
Reinvention? Because that was we actually went into the social media analysis with the question around how is reinvention defined for these two political tribes. Reinvention, our tagline is keep reinventing. And so that was the fundamental question we went into the social media analysis with. We didn't find that.
Hi, I'm curious as to how you linked consumer insights to your company's political positions and lobbying efforts. I work for AARP, and our shift towards becoming more consumer-centric is leading us to very tough conversations around, do we lead with policy, for example, around social security, environment, or do we lead with what the consumers tell us they want and need?
I don't know if I have a great answer to that. I mean, for us, we understood what was important to our customers, and what the fundamental task we had is what's important as unifiers, as I said, and then we chose those. We did not choose all 6 of those, by the way. We've chosen education, environment, and then we're telling stories that pay off family and some of those others. So that was just a judgment call that we made based on our brand and our brand objectives. So I'd love it if someone would give me what did you think of the video? Actually, that's a requirement.
That was great.
Before you ask a question, you have to give me your opinion.
Well, I thought it was really moving. I heard some in the audience, so I don't know. I don't want to speak for other people, but I thought it was really lovely insight-based work. I'm curious whether internally that is viewed as leaning into the political climate. About a year ago, Ipsos published a study about the risks brands face when they are seen to be leaning into the political movement, particularly if they are seen to be sided in one way, right? And there might be brands in the room who've been on the receiving end of some of this. Yeah, I was thinking about you guys, Alabine. What I keep hearing internally at Diageo is that our brands are apolitical, and that's true of some brands, but certain brands actually have consumer bases that have dramatic skews. And so much of what's happening culturally is politicized right now. I'm just curious about your perspective on whether, as a marketer, you think leaning into the cultural tensions are a real advantage, even if they are seen internally or externally as political.
That's a great question. I can tell you how we thought about that issue as we went into this. We initiated the work to understand how we could unify and how we could appeal across. The brand, I have political opinions, my boss had, there are political opinions in the company, and the company skews a certain way. But we feel we have a responsibility to our customers to not do that, and I think it would be a risk for our brand to do that, especially given the aspiration to be a very democratic brand that appeals across the businesses. You'll notice that was not political in the sense that it took sides. It simply took on the issue of what this may be doing to families. How many of you have, I won't ask you to raise your hands, how many of you have had those conversations in places that you shouldn't have? So that's the position we were taking, is let's elevate and let's recognize what's important.
Hi, so my opinion of the video was I thought it was very moving. I will say that the mother looked almost the same age as the daughter, so that just calls it into credibility a little bit. I'm just curious how
They were sisters.
They were sisters.
Yes,
Oh, I wasn't
yeah.
following that. Okay, all right. Scratch that comment. I'm curious how you landed on politics in such an explosive environment for products such as printers and PCs. Because that seems like a really interesting but potentially brave choice from my perspective. So it's not an obvious connection from a brand perspective in an emotional space to go, but it sounds like at some point you made a decision to do work in this space, and I was sitting here trying to make the connection between your products and how you went there. It was great work.
So, no, thank you.
Thank you very much.
And the reason I'm asking actually for an opinion is not looking for, I'm not fishing for compliments. It actually, internally when we did this, it was scary because we were talking about, so what happened in the election? So that was what made us ask that question. And then as we evolved the question into reinvent democratic brand, how do we ensure that we're doing the right things here? And that we're not accidentally stepping into something where we're taking a position inadvertently that is politicized. So actually understanding those commonalities and the nuance within how those commonalities are defined has been incredibly helpful for us. Yeah.
So I know that you had reinvent before you embarked on this study, but it seems really interesting that when you the process that you described sounded pretty sort of blank slate, that you have people in a room and you're asking them about political issues and then you ask them what they agree on, and it seems like somehow reinvent just happens to be sort of a bridge between both of those two tribes. Invent is just about looking forward, but reinvent implies a certain looking to the past to sort of inspire where we go from here. I'm curious. I mean, is that an accident, or was reinvent somehow planted into the focus group participants?
It actually wasn't planted into the focus group participants. I think we asked the question of reinvent to identify the cultural definitions of that. We confirmed that I mentioned there was some online work that was done prior, with online focus groups that was done. So we explored some of that in that forum. But when we put them in the room, we didn't address that. The agreement came out around those 6 things. And clearly, there's naturally a reinvention opportunity within each of those. So. Good.